this episode we're finishing off, at least for the foreseeable future, my sadly short acquaintance with the Atari ST, having only gotten to its third episode. And I might as well start off with an Atari classic, so here's Super Sprint. A classic top-down single-screen racer with 8 tracks of fun and mayhem, with 3 cars zooming around the track. Of course, I played this one a lot more on the C64, but it's always felt like it should be played on an arcade machine, but I never did. And then once I got to try out the game on MAME, the arcade emulator, for the first time some 20 years ago, it didn't work properly. So the closest equivalent was the ST version, since the game didn't get an Amiga port until a few years ago. The ST version of Super Sprint was awesome back then, compared to the C64 version at least. Although I never got to play it to its full potential, one of the great things about the ST version was the ability to have all 3 cars controlled by human players. Also, getting to play all 8 tracks in whichever order you chose was a nice upgrade from the split multi-load version of the C64. What I didn't really realize back then was that the ST version wasn't developed by Atari either, which was weird, since the arcade original was by Atari Corporation, so one would expect them to get the job done in-house, instead of giving it to a third-party developer team. Not that State of the Art didn't do a fine job of it, but rather it does lessen the value a tiny bit. Still, it's a fine arcade conversion for the Atari ST and worth having a look. Originally released on the lesser-known 16-bit Acorn Archimedes as Sarge in 1987, this little gem by David Braben was released on other platforms as Virus in 1988, and my introduction to the game happened through Atari ST no more than maybe 15 years ago, when I was still firmly playing ST games through emulation. After getting my own Atari ST, I have been playing Virus a little bit more often, but I have to admit, Virus has a pretty steep learning curve, so it took me a while to figure it out, and I'm still pretty far from mastering it. See, the most complicated thing to get your head around in Virus, or Zarge, is the way your lander handles. It only has a single thruster at the bottom, pointing downwards, so the only way to get anywhere is to tilt your lander towards your intended direction and hope for the best. This isn't as easy as it might sound though, because the lander can be flipped upside down quite easily, and straightening it up is harder than getting it upside down. The idea is to destroy all the enemies from each area, which means the little moving things in the minimap at the top left corner. These enemies are carrying and spreading viruses which will infect the green ground areas into red infected ones, and the less ground they have infected by the time you destroy the last one of them, the more bonus points you will get. Of course, it might take a while to even successfully destroy a single one of them, because the controls are so hard to become comfortable with, and it doesn't help much either that your ship is not shaped clearly enough to see where you are pointing at most of the time. Also, the area that is visible to you is a bit too small to know exactly where you are, and if you do get close to an enemy, what altitude they are exactly. Once you do get comfortable enough with the controls and the limited visibility, the game does grow on you gradually. Virus, or Zarge, is an important piece of 3D games history because it is one of the first solid 3D games, and the first to have lighting effects and shadowing. So it's quite obvious that it was conceived strictly as a 16-bit game, but to everyone's disbelief, there was also a version made for the ZX Spectrum, which is also an interesting thing to check out. From the furthest depths of my memory, the last game that I ever remember playing on the Atari ST at the turn of the 90s was a rather unforgettable action game based on one of the lesser Arnold Schwarzenegger action movies, Red Heat. Now, those of you who have played this game will have quickly associated the word unforgettable with the word regrettable, which is more descriptive. Back Back in the day, I only played the first level of Red Heat, which takes place in a Russian sauna. And you walk from right to left and engage in hand-to-hand combat with many unclothed bad guys. While the presentation is unique and somewhat impressive for its time, I was left with a bad impression of the controls. The later levels let you use a weapon, and in true late 80s Ocean Software style, there are also various kinds of sub-games. Red Heat is a game that has the possibility of growing on you if you ever manage to make any real progress in it, but I have to say the laggy controls can be off-putting. Thanks to its overly ambitious graphical presentation, Red Heat has the feel of having been designed primarily for the 16-bits, although I can't say the game is any better for it. For me, it's a game I connect strongly with the Atari ST, although I can't say I've ever spent too much time on it. But then I don't think I have seen the movie more than once either. Perhaps I should. Game number 4 for today is another title that I only read about in a Finnish gaming magazine at the turn of the 90s, Spherical, from Rainbow Arts 1989. I always thought that the game looks suspiciously like Solomon's Key, and I was always interested to play it, but I didn't get to actually play the game until emulation came along, and the C64 version was the first one I tried. I didn't like it too much then because the graphics were a bit muddy and it loaded a bit too slowly for a game like this. Eventually I found out that the 16-bit version was used for the Finnish review, and I dug out the ST version, which made a lot more sense because that's where this game was designed on and first released on. When you start the game, you will notice the similarities Spherical has to Solomon's Key are a bit too obvious. The way the levels are designed look very similar, and the way you control a magician who can build and disintegrate blocks with magic in exactly the same way as in Solomon's Key are both almost copyright infringement stuff. However, the idea is very different, and some of the gameplay rules have not all been straight from the source. The way the game plays is, you start each level with you trying to find a path for the star ball to descend safely to the exit. Thankfully, you do have a fair amount of time to prepare the way for the star ball to begin its descent. When the star ball has reached the exit, the level is completed, so you don't need to worry about getting yourself to the exit. However, if you want to pick up some score items or other things, you do need to do that while working on the pathway for the star ball. But what I didn't expect from this game was that it has a cooperative two-player mode instead of the usual arcade-style turn-based one. Underneath its uncomfortably familiar-looking surface, Spherical is very much its own game and should be approached with some respect because it is actually quite unique. It is best experienced on a 16-bit computer though. For the foreseeable future, the last game I will be including for the Atari ST is a game I came to know through the unique game series I wrote for the blog. Killdozers, released by Lancor in 1988, is a tank shooter of sorts, and it was only ever released on the Atari ST, which is exactly the reason why I came to know it. From what I can tell, it was only released in France, so my chances of having ever come across it outside of emulation before it was a thing are practically nil. Coming from France, it will come as no great surprise that Killdozers is a bit of a mixed bag. It doesn't quite know what it is supposed to be because there are elements of Legend of Zelda, Firepower, and perhaps even Berserk in here. You get to choose one of 4 tanks before you start the game, and each of them have their own special features. There are 3 different kinds of ammunition for the 3 given weapons, and I'm still not completely sure if I'm using them correctly because there are some enemies that I just cannot figure out what weapon I'm supposed to be using on them, or if they can even be destroyed. But I do kind of like it, and I wish I had the opportunity to like it more, but the problem is, I can't seem to ever get to play it more than perhaps 5 or 6 screens because the game tends to freeze randomly. I suppose it could be a TOS version problem or something, since I don't remember having that problem when I played Killdozers for the inclusion in the unique game series back in, 2014 or something. I am looking to purchase an Atari STE at some point though, so perhaps that will help my problem with this game too. And that would also give me a chance to bring in some more games for the 16-bit Atari. But until that time comes, this is all I have to offer for the ST.